The family members were brought in, the supporters were brought in before the media was, before spectators were brought in. I imagine that they were given some sort of an admonition. We didn't hear it, but it's common in these cases to get some sort of an admonition about outbursts. There weren't any that were outrageous or anything that would upset any judge, I can imagine.
Did the judge warn the courtroom not to control themselves?
No warning at all. There was a big delay. It was supposed to start at 1:30 local time. We didn't actually get in the courtroom until about 1:38, 1:40, sometimes around that. Then when the verdict was read, it all happened very, very quickly. The prosecutor, Juan Martinez, came in. The defense attorney, Kirk Nurmi, came in. Then they brought in Jodi Arias. The jury came in, and then right away they handed that verdict to the clerk, and it was read.
Any reaction from Juan Martinez? Did he make eye contact with the family? Anything that you noticed?
Honestly, I could not see him from where I was standing, Ted, but clearly he is someone that supporters of the prosecution have been very happy with his performance. He's been one of the stars of this trial, if you will.
We just saw one of Travis Alexander's friends leave the courtroom here, or courthouse, and that's why you heard Ashley the applause there. Ashley?
Ted, we are over a block away from you. We can hear the eruptions of emotion, the screams. Jeffrey Toobin and I getting breaking news on our Blackberries about some of the breakdowns of the jury vote. If you're just joining us, I want to reset for you what we're covering here in Phoenix, Arizona, outside of the Maricopa County Superior Courthouse. A jury of 8 men and 4 women has just reached its verdict and delivered that verdict in the courtroom. Guilty. Jodi Arias is guilty of first-degree murder in the killing of Travis Alexander, a brutal, to be sure, a brutal and painful death that man suffered over 4 years ago. Jodi Arias could have been found not guilty. She also could have been found guilty of lesser included. That did not happen. And now this story will move to another phase, a phase in which the jury needs to decide if her life is worth saving or if her life needs to be taken in the death penalty phase. I also want to just break down for you inside the courtroom what the jury decided and how it voted. There were 2 theories, Jeffrey Toobin, on which they could have arrived at a guilty verdict in a first-degree murder. One was a premeditated murder, and the other was a felony murder. I think our viewers understand what a premeditated murder is, but a felony murder means that the killing or the death of Travis Alexander resulted in the commission of a felony, and these prosecutors said the underlying felony would have been a break and enter. I can report to you that as the jurors made their decision, 5 of them voted that it was premeditated only, 7 voted that it was premeditated and felony, and 0 actually voted for the alternative, just a felony murder. Does that speak to you in any way?
Well, I think the reason why this case is now a death penalty case is that 12 jurors found it premeditated.
Yes.
If I were the defense team, I would take a tiny bit of hope from the fact that there was not unanimity on both theories, because that is they have to be unanimous when it comes to the death penalty. The focus is really very different now. Now that we move to the penalty phase, Jodi Arias is looking for just 1 juror. That's all it takes. 1 juror can make this into a life in prison case and not a death penalty case. The jury does not have to be unanimous if it's not going to be the death penalty. It has to be unanimous for the death penalty, but 11-1 for the death penalty is life in prison. And that's where things get very difficult to predict, because you never know what was going to move 1 juror to make it a non-death penalty case.
Critical to remind our viewers that every one of these jurors that was impaneled during voir dire process was asked if they are, essentially death qualified, if they could in fact render a death verdict, and they had to answer truthfully on the stand under oath that they could in fact do so if that was required of them.
That's true, but that doesn't mean they will. I mean, that's what's really very. And you know, one of the things. One of the theories behind the defense putting Jodi Arias on the witness stand for so long, was it 17 days, 18 days? I mean, it was just, I've never seen anyone testify in a criminal case for that long, is to make the jury look at her and think, okay, she's guilty, but are we really going to execute this woman? Are we going to look her in the eye and say she has to die at the hands of the state? That's the only issue left in this case, and we'll start to know the answer tomorrow.
All right, a little bit more technical information I think is critical as well as we move into the next phase. Our producers are letting us know that the decisions have been made in terms of timing as to how we move forward. The aggravation phase in this case, which will ultimately lead us towards life in prison or death, and there are some things in between there, begins at 4 p.m. tomorrow Eastern Time. It could be 2 days. It could take 2 days to go through this process. That surprises me.
I thought it could be longer than that.
So would I. I would have thought it would be longer, but it could be 2 days at this point. The jury then will deliberate to see if the aggravators are met. This is an unusual process in this jurisdiction. In many other cases that Jeffrey and I have covered, we essentially go from a guilt-innocence phase to a aggravators versus mitigators phase, all in one big tub. But this jury needs to deliberate first in the aggravation phase on whether there is an aggravator that's been met on cruelty, whether Travis Alexander suffered cruelty in the manner in which he was killed. Then they will go on to a further phase in a decision on whether aggravators outweigh the mitigators. And this is a science, and Jeff, listen, this is a science I have never understood. I always imagined it was a formula, a checklist, and whether one checklist outweighs the other. And it is not a checklist. It is a gut sensation after hearing all aggravators and mitigators.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, that's the thing that the Supreme Court, frankly, has struggled with for all these years. You know, in 1972, the Supreme Court of the United States said no more death penalty in the United States. 1976, they let the death penalty back in, but they set up this structure that has now become somewhat familiar to many folks, which is aggravating factors versus mitigating factors. And Wolf Blitzer is going to take it from here.
Before you say to Wolf, it remains to be seen. Jodi Arias could take the stand again to plead for her life as well, and that's critical here.
Casey Wyan, one of our reporters, was inside the courtroom. He's joining us right now. Casey, tell our viewers how that went down. Once, what was the mood when they got the guilty verdict, first-degree murder?
Well, the mood in anticipation of that verdict was very, very tense, as you can imagine, Wolf. Not a sound in that courtroom. But once the verdict was announced, members of Travis Alexander's family and his supporters gasped, and some of them started sobbing. Many of them had been praying before. I don't want to say many, a couple of them had been praying before the verdict, and they just had an outpouring of what was relief, tears, thanking God, so happy that it was over. Clearly a big sense of relief on that side. Jodi Arias' side was farther away from me. I couldn't see much of their reaction. There wasn't much at all, and viewers on television probably got a better view of her face than I did, and you could see her reaction coming up.
And you know, Casey, as we watch this, I want to bring Jeffrey Toobin in for a moment. This next phase, Jeffrey, they're going to determine basically whether she's going to get the death penalty or life in prison. Those are basically the only two options right now. Is that right?
There is a possibility that if she doesn't get the death penalty, she could get 25 years. As I understand Arizona law, the judge would have an option of giving her life in prison, life without parole, or 25 years if she doesn't get the death penalty. But obviously the key task in front of the jury now is to deal with the question of whether she should be executed.
Ashley is there as well. Ashley, this has been a dramatic moment. What, 3.5 months this trial has been going on? Now it's going to be several more days before we know what the penalty will be.
And a very unusual set of circumstances in this jurisdiction. In fact, Jeffrey and I were just discussing, and we hadn't seen this before, that in this second phase, it's a two-prong approach to assessing whether aggravators are met in this case. And the judge laid out very early on in the case that the particular aggravator of interest was the cruelty that Travis Alexander suffered in this murder. If they can agree that cruelty was in fact an aggravator that existed in this murder, then they will move on to the penalty phase. And that's where the aggravators and the mitigators would be presented in possibly many days. I can't tell you how many days it would take. There's been a mitigation specialist that Jeffrey and I were just talking about that's been working with Jodi Arias for months and months, been visiting her in jail. She's been in jail for 4.5 years, so there's been plenty of time for them to assess just what quality she is as a person and how much, and I hate to say it, it really comes down to the qualities of Jodi as a person, whether she's worth saving, or the essential evils of this woman and whether she's worth putting to death. So two more phases.
And Wolf, just to make clear, Jodi Arias herself has the option of testifying in both of these proceedings. This first proceeding about cruelty, and then in the broader penalty phase, Jodi Arias, who is a very familiar person to this jury, she testified for almost 3 weeks, she has the option of going back on the witness stand and essentially to plea for her life.
Arizona jury, we just saw a little while ago, convicted Jodi Arias of first-degree murder, and now we're going to find out what her fate will be, 25 years, life, or the death sentence.
State of Arizona versus Jodi Ann Arias, verdict, count 1. We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn, in the above entitled action, upon our oaths, do find the defendant as to count 1, first-degree murder, guilty.
All right, so there's the verdict right there, announced just an hour or so ago. Jodi Arias found guilty of first-degree murder for the gruesome 2008 killing of her ex-boyfriend, Travis Alexander. But the drama is far from over. Now jurors must decide whether Arias will be put to death for her crime. Let's go straight to Phoenix. CNN's Ashley Banfield is right outside the courthouse. Ashley, how much of a surprise was this that she was convicted of first-degree murder?
You know, based on the screams of joy, literally from hundreds of people who gathered outside this Maricopa County Superior Courthouse on the plaza, perhaps, I don't know, not much of a surprise, but certainly a lot of jubilation. There were literally cries of joy that were moving out into the streets as people began to disperse after that decision was read. You may have seen only a mere sigh on the face of Jodi Arias moments after learning that this jury had convicted her of the most serious charge they could have, premeditated murder, carrying with it the death penalty. But certainly the eruption of joy outside the courthouse was really quite remarkable. We're about a block away, and it was clear as day what we could hear from those who had come down here to hear this. There are some of the images of those who come down with their cameras, their cell phones, the media that was here as well. I want to bring in my colleague Casey Wyan, who was in the courtroom. I don't know, Casey, if you could hear the resounding noise from outside the windows of this courthouse, but you certainly had the view from inside that courtroom. Can you describe that for us?
There were eruptions of joy, sobs, outpouring of emotion from inside the courtroom. I think when Wolf played that clip of when Jodi Arias was sentenced, you could hear one of those sighs. Those turned into sobs of joy, sobs of relief by Travis Alexander's family and supporters of his. We also had a lot of spectators upstairs outside the courtroom trying to get a seat. It was packed inside the courtroom. Not many folks were able to get in. I want to share what one spectator who's been watching this trial all along said to me. He talked about the O.J. Simpson case in California. He talked about the Casey Anthony case in Florida. He said, this is not Florida. This is not California. This is Arizona. They're going to convict her, and they're going to convict her of first-degree murder. That's the sentiment a lot of folks were sharing before this, and it turned out that they were exactly right. One more interesting thing I want to share with you, Ashley. Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio has scheduled a news conference for about a half hour from now. He is going to talk about the custody arrangements for Jodi Arias now that she has been convicted of first-degree murder. Presumably, those custody arrangements could change. We'll have to hear what the sheriff has to say about that, Ashley.
Well, without question, Casey, those state marshals are going to have her in their custody for a few more days to come in this courthouse that we're in front of, because the cells that are in this courthouse are where people like Jodi Arias are kept while there are further decisions to be made about their greater future. So without question, she's going to be here, and she's going to have to go through a whole lot more in this courtroom in the days to come. I also want to just add that the family of Travis Alexander, you saw Casey during his reporting on their jubilation in this courtroom, they occupied 3 whole rows of that courtroom. The family of Jodi Arias occupied 2 rows and was understandably rather silent after that verdict was read. Very little reaction from her mother at all. At least what we could witness. No tears that we could see when the camera was on her. There were 5 rows of media. You can see Arjeen Casares in one of those rows, Beth Karras, 2 of our CNN and HLN correspondents who watched these verdicts come down as well. Extraordinarily dramatic, to say the least, and it should be. This is a death penalty case. I want to bring in our panel of experts on this. With me is Sunny Hostin, a former federal prosecutor who's live with us in Philadelphia, as well Paul Callan, defense attorney and professor of law as well, who is live with us in New York City, and my colleague Jeffrey Toobin, who joins me live here right out front of the Maricopa County Courthouse. For starters, I think what's critical to outline, Jeff Toobin, is the process that comes next. This family is not through with what they're going to hear in that courtroom.
No, they're not. This is a very unusual process, even among states that have a death penalty. It's a 2-part penalty phase. The first part, which will start tomorrow afternoon here, is the is to determine solely if the crime was especially cruel. If the jury finds that the crime was especially cruel, unanimously, they then move to the more traditional penalty phase, where the jury will have to find unanimously to impose the death penalty. So at this point, all Jodi Arias needs is 1 juror in either this first short process or the longer penalty phase to say, no, this should not be a death penalty case. 11-1 for the death penalty is not enough at this stage. The state needs a unanimous finding in both this first process about cruelty and then the penalty phase. The state has to win both of them unanimously for a death penalty to result.
And what might be even more sort of astounding, Jeffrey Toobin and I were just going over the statutes together. Paul Callan, I want to bring you in on this, is that yes, the jury must be unanimous in its decision on the gravest aggravator, which is this cruelty aggravator. Especially cruel is how they word it, but they also must be unanimous if they choose not to go ahead with that aggravator. There is a very unusual situation that can develop here, whereby this judge can impanel another jury. We were both astounded to see this in a sentencing phase, Paul Callan. I don't know if in your years of practice you have heard of a brand new jury that can be impaneled in a secondary phase in a death penalty case. Had you heard of this?
No, I've never seen it. I'm astounded by it, and frankly, I wonder if it would be even constitutional, because the whole idea in a death penalty case is that the jury sees everything and understands that the crime is so heinous that the death penalty has to be imposed. But, you know, on the issue of the aggravator, you know, I think she's facing a strong probability of a death penalty here, because if this jury wanted to cut her some slack, Ashley, and give her something less, they had a lot of options here. They could have come in with second-degree murder. They could have said manslaughter. It was a heat of passion situation. And was this a cruel murder? He was stabbed 27 times and shot in the head. He was naked in a shower. I mean, could a death be more cruel than that? And what will her mitigating factors be? It looks like he was unarmed. Obviously, the jury has already rejected her, that she was a beaten woman or an abused woman, and that's why she did it. So where are the mitigating factors? If you just apply the law, now let's forget whether we favor or oppose the death penalty. You just apply the law, this is a death penalty case.
Well, I just want to bring in a little bit more news. This is coming courtesy of our Grace Wong, a producer who's been working within the courtroom, and she's reporting that the aggravation, or at least the sentencing phase, which begins with the aggravation phase, begins tomorrow at 4 o'clock Eastern time. That's 1 o'clock local time here in Phoenix. And the state is expected to call 1 witness, at least for tomorrow, and that is the medical examiner. His name is Dr. Kevin Horn. He's expected to take up most of the afternoon tomorrow, and I don't think it's any secret as to why. The medical examiner would be one of the first witnesses. Former federal prosecutor Sunny Hostin, I'm sure you would have great insight as to why the medical examiner would be the first up on the stand and what some of the things Dr. Horn might say on that stand.
Well, it certainly makes sense if you're trying to prove the cruelty of this crime. And I agree with Paul, I agree with Jeff. I really don't think that the cruelty, the aggravating phase is really the issue here, because under Arizona law, Ashley, cruel is described as disposed to inflict pain in a wanton, vindictive manner, sadistic or depraved. I think we can all agree when that medical examiner gets on the witness stand and describes the shot and describes the almost 30 stab wounds and describes that Travis Alexander was almost decapitated in this. I think that certainly takes this out of sort of the norm of first-degree murder into the cruel realm. And so I really don't think that this first phase of this two-part phase is really the issue. I think the real issue is what we will hear when the defense tries these mitigating factors, to put these mitigating factors in front of the jury. And I think we're going to hear a lot about this alleged PTSD. I think we're going to hear perhaps about the remorse here. I think we're going to perhaps hear about from her family, how her family loves her, how her life should be spared. But in my view, when you look at this type of crime and the fact pattern here, once that medical examiner gets on the witness stand, I can't imagine that the cruel part of this is not going to be determined.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what, Sunny Hostin, if she wants to display any modicum of remorse in this courtroom, there will be version 4 of how this crime was perpetrated, and she will have to break down and sob and say that she is sorry for the premeditated killing of Travis Alexander, and it remains to be seen whether that's an opportunity, but she will have the opportunity, most likely, if she chooses, to get up on this stand. One other bit of business outside of the courthouse here, and we're at local time, 3:10 in the afternoon. The sheriff, well-known sheriff, nationally well-known sheriff, Joe Arpaio of Maricopa County, is scheduled to give a news conference somewhere in this vicinity, so we're awaiting that Wolf Blitzer. He's likely to give more details on, as we heard Casey Wyan report earlier, on the incarceration plans, possibly pending this next phase, the sentencing phase, but also potentially beyond as well, Wolf.